In this video, we're going to take a look at the difference between local HTML and served HTML. With having a server, you've got the remote server somewhere remote, and you've got wires. You have a cable modem. It's through the cable company. If it's Bell, it could be fiber to your house. And in your house, you've got a computer. And when you click on a link, it sends a signal to the server, and the server then finds that file, and actually a collection of files, and progressively sends it back to your computer, and your browser then takes that code and assembles a version, a visual version of the code that's sitting on the remote server. You can create HTML files and you can view them just as if you were using a server, but you don't have to use a server. You can do it all on your own computer, and it can be a Windows machine or a Macintosh machine or Linux. It doesn't matter. That's what's called local. You can do almost everything without a server. Now, there are certain things that you cannot do, but and we'll get into that shortly. But basically what happens is you've got your computer here, and inside the computer is your hard drive, and you create a directory on your hard drive, and you place your files in the directory. And you can also have a subdirectory inside there, and you have other files. You can have subdirectories and subdirectories if you want. And then you have your browser. And your browser can be Chrome, which is what I use. You could use Safari if you're on a Macintosh or on iOS. You can use Internet Explorer if you're on Windows or Firefox or whatever. And what you do with your keyboard and your mouse is you select a file on the hard drive. You can do that from within the hard drive. You can double click on a file, and then your computer will work internally and serve up these files, send them to the browser, and the browser will, as the browser does with the remote copies, it will interpret the code and assemble a page, and then you have all sorts of nice graphics and text on your page, and so on. You should be able to create all your work, at least initially, using local methods. And the reason we do that is we don't want to throw too much into your pot before you can make a proper soup out of it. We're going to start with a very few ingredients and then build on that. And eventually, if you do this properly, you can then take your web directories and copy them to the server and view them, and you really shouldn't know that much of a difference. So let's see how that works. I'm going to create a new folder, and I'll call it Web. And let's look at it in icons. Right now there's nothing in this folder. I'm going to create another folder inside here. I'm going to call it CSS, and there are no items in that. I'm going to copy my boilerplate HTML file into this by option dragging. So now I have in my folder called web, I've got an index.html, and if we open this file in Text Wrangler, you'll see in the head there's a link element, and it's looking for a file called css/styles.css, and that is going to be in here. And we can actually, once we get into CSS in a few days, we'll start to populate this directory. But this is basically what you need to use if you're going to author HTML pages locally. One thing you should always be aware of, and you should always be somewhat paranoid about this, is creating backup copies. In fact, you should have 2 backup copies. You should have 2 separate flash drives and copy different versions onto your 2 flash drives, because if you lose one flash drive, you'll always have the other one. So if you're working in the lab, for example, you can work like I'm doing on my desktop, but then before you leave, you need to copy this folder into a flash drive. And often it's a good idea to, as I say, save different versions. In other words, have call this one web. In my case, it's June 28th. So call it web June 28th, save that. And then the next time, change the name to whatever date you're using and copy that, and have the old one, the June 28th, next to your new one, might be July 4th, and then keep adding. The reason you do that is if your current version is corrupted in some way, then you can always go back to your previous version, and then all you'll be out of is the work that you did between the last time and now. This folder is known as the root directory. This is kind of the minimum directory. You can also have images. You can create another folder and call it images, or you can have the images lying out with your pages if you want. There's no rule. It's whatever is easy for you. Remember, never use uppercase letters when you name your files. There may be other directories that you want to include, like JS, once we get into JavaScript. Remember that the name of the subdirectory gets added to the URL, so try to keep the names of your subdirectories short but informative.